Welcome to FII ThinkPod. My name is Francisco.
And I'm Aziz, and at ThinkPod, we speak about the smartest ideas and the biggest challenges facing the world right now. We speak about where we are, how we got here, and where we're going.
Today's guest on ThinkPod is David Rosenberg, CEO of Aerofarms. Their vertical farms have revolutionized indoor farming. They grow plants without sun or soil. We discuss their business, climate crisis, and the need for transformational change, and the likelihood it is entrepreneurs who will deliver it.
So David, we're going to start with you just talking about, you're a true pioneer in the area of vertical farming, doing a lot of interesting work there. Can you just define the space for us, talk about the innovation in that area, and talk about what was wrong in your opinion about the conventional ways of farming previously?
So I'm a kid from the Bronx. I'm not from the farming industry. And what got me here was the awareness of how much water goes to agriculture. Most fresh water goes to agriculture. Most freshwater contamination comes from agriculture. So if one wants to solve water, one needs to look at agriculture. So looking at that and then looking at where is there pain in the agriculture space. As a business guy, typically look for pain, then figure out where's there an aspirin or where's there a solution to the pain. So one of the pains I saw was spoilage. So in the leafy green category, which is our beachhead of this movement, there's 60% spoilage in the industry. So it screams disruption, technological disruption. Then looking at technological drivers, this is my fourth Change the World company, second one I founded and led, looking at where's there technology that could really be impactful, and read something called Heitz's Law, analogous to Moore's Law. Moore's Law talks about computing speed. Heitz's Law talks about the efficiency of a diode improving by about 50% every 3 years. And then I realized this could enable a new industry of indoor farming, where going back to the spoilage, a lot of that spoilage happens on the supply chain route. So I thought of it internally as a disintermediate of the supply chain. How does one enable local food production, whether it's the equator, the North Pole, all over the world?
So vertical farming helps reduce water use, but what about energy consumption? A lot of vertical farming uses a lot of energy. How would you respond to that typical criticism?
Well, first, I should describe what vertical farming is. So basically, we grow plants. Plants don't need soil, they don't need sun. Instead of soil, we use nutrients and micronutrients and different growth media. Instead of sun, we use LEDs, light-emitting diodes. And we grow in warehouses as opposed to greenhouses. My co-founder wrote a white paper of why the sun isn't free. And one way to internalize that is if a plant, let's say, and I'll use Fahrenheit, if a plant wants, let's say, between 70 and 73 degrees Fahrenheit, but in a greenhouse, if you've heard of the term, the greenhouse effect referring to global warming, it's because greenhouses get freaking hot. So here, if that in a greenhouse gets to be 110 degrees or 106 degrees during the day and like 60 degrees at night, all of a sudden that plant is out of its sweet spot. So here in fully controlled agriculture, we could give the plant what it wants, how it wants it, when it wants it. From an energy standpoint, one, there's ways to be energy efficient that's very impactful, and I'll talk about that, and then I'll also talk about what the alternative is in the field. So the energy efficiency, plants don't need all the spectrum of light under a rainbow. They really mostly want red and blue spectrum to optimize photosynthesis. The energy hog in spectrum is yellow spectrum. Most of the energy goes to yellow spectrum. That happens to be a relatively inefficient spectrum from a photosynthesis standpoint. So here we strip out the inefficient spectrum, amplify the efficient spectrum to reduce the energy footprint. And that's going down as diodes, capacitors, drivers, all the parts of a luminaire go down. And additionally, with data analytics, there are ways to understand irrigation. So the three energy sources are lights, pumps, HVAC. And in each one of those, like most farmers, over-irrigate. And I would argue the biggest contribution of Aerofarms is unlocking this Rosetta Stone of what makes a plant grow. So with fully controlled agriculture, test it, sample it, course correct, so irrigate less. How often do the pumps need to go on to lower the energy footprint and make the plants more efficient? Same thing with HVAC. So there's a lot of ways to continually reduce the energy. And in the field farming, people don't realize how much water, embodied water, goes into fertilizers, pesticides, all these features. Like we grow with 0 pesticides, just moving water. Most of the plants we grow in the US are grown in Salinas, San Joaquin, and Northern California. Most of the water is shipped from the Colorado River to those areas in California. About 25% of California's utility bill is spent shipping water around. So there's a lot of embodied water and energy in that calculation. And then think of what I said about spoilage. It's not energy to grow, it's energy to consume. If 60% doesn't get consumed, what's the embodied energy in that?
From your just statements, you seem like a man of numbers, and you had very striking and interesting stats there. One of the key stats that gets promoted around the globe right now is 50-50 equality. There's an increasing movement to support just equality and making sure that everybody has equal proportion of the pie. How does Aerofarm support this through their work, and how do they make sure that the rest of the community is getting brought in with them, the more conventional sorts of farming? Is there any role do you guys play, and how do you see yourself becoming a player in that space in the future?
So when we built the company, we said early on, let's make sure we make decisions based on our communities, the environment, and shareholders. Really leading with communities, and that's our people at Aerofarms as well as the communities we interact. So there's an element of building these on the other side of the tracks, if you will. So our facility that feeds the New York City area is in Newark. Newark is a great city, but it's a city of some economic hardship. So here we're going there. I would say the biggest impact we have is inspiring the community of look at the innovation happening in their backyard, but we're employing from people in the community. And to build on that, we have a program with past offenders. Philosophically, I believe someone commits a crime, they go to jail, and then they pay their time, and society is supposed to afterwards bring them back into the fold. It doesn't happen, especially in the US, it doesn't happen enough. And we're in this cycle where people then go back to jail and they're reincarcerated. So we've put up together a program to purposefully hire this really separated member of society and bring them into the fold. Just actually last week, we went into an additional 350 retail chains for a retailer called Stop and Shop. So 350 additional ones. And the people that we pooled to increase our packaging capacity were from this area. And we pay a minimum $15 coming in, $15 an hour coming in this facility, where minimum wage in the US is about $11. So here we're paying above that to try and not only bring people in, but give them a better life and also give them a pathway to a career. I could give you multiple examples of where people came in from this reentry program and are now managing people within Aerofarms. Separately, what we realized it's about, from a food standpoint, we produce food. It's not about calories, it's about nutrition. There's a correlation between education and the consumption of fruits and vegetables. And leafy greens, if you don't start eating them early enough, it's a funny looking green food. So how do you increase the consumption? And we have a saying, people that eat together stay together. So we have free salads at Aerofarms. And I noticed people from a certain social economic demographic didn't eat the salads. And as much as you encourage, it was hard. And it was because the eating habits are already established. So we put together a program of farms in schools to help get behavior in. And here the kids, it's K through 8th grade, the kids seed, grow, harvest. The farm's about the size of where we're sitting. And a farm could feed 200 kids, 3 meals a week, something of that nature. And the kids, their intellectual curiosity starts chiming in and they start eating the food. And pretty soon, Michelle Obama was a big advocate of this program when there was one of her initiatives was childhood nutrition when she was First Lady. But the kids started eating this instead of the fries.
In terms of eating leafy greens, healthy food typically is more expensive. Outside of the school program, are there any other programs or policies within Aerofarms that you're trying to promote to encourage people to eat healthier food, in particular for growing children, but also adults as well?
A couple things. One is we're certainly promoting safe food. So too much of our food has food contamination, and we're working in the US with Congress to increase standards of performance. So there's the FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act. And how does that apply to farmers? I'm biased, but I think we operate the safest farm in the world. And E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria, these are problems, and people don't realize also the chemicals, the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that they're putting in their bodies. And people incorrectly think organic means no pesticides. About 95% of organics in leafy greens, for example, have organic pesticides. You think of what a pesticide is, it's a chemical that's meant to kill things, bugs, weeds, things of that nature. So from a human health standpoint, we are trying to educate people that there's a way to grow without pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and have real clean food, true clean food, so we're not ingesting all these harmful chemicals. And then how do we create standards and awareness? Labels get very funky. Some people get very defensive on their market position, like the organics movement, but how do we educate consumers so they understand what they want, but also that they ask how, not just what the product is, but how is it grown? And we at Aerofarms changed. We used to have a different brand because how we grow used to be on the back of the label. Whether it's COVID or something else, we saw this societal change where people are starting to ask how. We realized, let's lead with technology. Let's showcase what we do and invite them into that story of how. And whether it's with policymakers to increase standards of performance, and that's not just pesticides, but using less water, having less waste, using less energy, all of those things, that's what really gets entrepreneurs to move and solve problems. And too often our policymakers get confused. Intentionally, for example, they want water to be free. Everyone should have access to water. But in actuality, it might be free when it comes down, but once you have to move it, there's a cost. And if you make it artificially free, then you're taking away the financial incentives for the entrepreneur and the innovator to solve that problem. So often, unintuitively, it's best to keep market prices at items, so then commerce factors in true cost of things and rewards the good actors for solving real problems.
In terms of traditional farming, particularly in terms of harvest seasons, it's very labor intensive. How does vertical farming compare in terms of, does it require a lot of human labor to process? And how does it compare to, say, other agriculture industries?
First, one of the starkest contrasts is in the field and crops we grow, typically there are 3 harvests a year. At Aerofarms, so let's say leafy greens, we have 26.
Wow.
Some crops we grow have 91. So it's night and day efficiency, and that's because it's the same seed, but really you could imagine as a person, if you eat differently, sleep differently, exercise differently, your biochemistry is different than if you had better or worse habits. So here, it's essentially we figure out what's the best a plant could be, how do you deliver it to get it the best, or what does it want to be the best, and then how do you deliver it? And that's what we're excellent at, from the engineering side, the mechanical side, to the operational side, the biological side, the genetic side, the environmental side, all of these coming in together to grow great plants, and we've grown about 600 different varieties of plants.
Wow.
But in the field, there are challenges, and on the labor side, it's different. So we have automation of seeding, harvesting, packaging, and sanitation, and automation between that. Most of it's just regular automation. There's some robotics. And then there's automation of imaging. Like we have drones that can fly around image instead of scouters. That said, there's still a labor component that's mostly in the packaging. Even with heavily automated packaging, you still have people working in the farm. And it allows them to elevate up to solve different problems. But it's labor is used in a different way. Sometimes when one puts in automation, it's either to improve quality or reduce cost of goods sold in labor. And some things we do for quality, sometimes we do for labor. And what we incorporate for automation is different in what parts of the world. So in some parts of the world where labor's lower, the cost of labor is lower, that influences the design of a farm. Is maybe we won't automate that because whatever that balance is, the IRRs is different depending on what it is.
So one area that we wanted to ask you about, David, when you started Aerofarms, it was a very different world, right? We're talking about almost 20 years ago now. Back then, climate change was not in the spotlight like it is right now. There's a lot more emphasis, I think, over the last 2 decades where people are focusing a lot more on climate change. How do you see that relationship in terms of your work at Aerofarms, and where do you stand on the whole climate change debate?
Well, a couple things. One is I've been a big advocate for being on the front end of the climate change debate. If one's heard of the book Cradle to Cradle, which was a philosophy that became a book, my last company, which was a nanotech company, we were the first ones to ever achieve Cradle to Cradle product certification. Then you mentioned I co-founded the Circular Economy Task Force, was co-chair of that for about 8-9 years. I actually recently stepped off. But I was also a member of the US delegation of the B20 that advises the G20 on resource efficiency. So, and when I started this, it was very much how do we have positive impact on the environment? And so my co-founder was doing this for 20 years. I started 10 years ago and we came together. The part that I tell people all the time, we're not going to be perfect immediately. And if we try and be perfect immediately, us or any company, it's going to fail, especially when you have broad ambitions. The key is let's state our ambitions are. An example is zero carbon footprint farms. So let's state those ambitions and then let's get a path to get there. So our ambitions, we have a pipeline project with renewable energy. And that's one of the ways we can get to zero carbon. But in everything we do, what I as a leader want to state that vision and then enable our people to go and achieve it. So here, that's how our pumps. So one of the engineers working on our pumps, or with our plant scientists said, all right, I think we're over irrigating. What does a plant really want? And a lot of farming, what we do, we use an aeroponic system, which roots want oxygen, leaves want carbon dioxide. So it's a mist to have a healthy oxygenation of the roots. But then if you actually study the roots, you'll see droplets going on. So capillary absorption sometimes takes time. So you look and you actually time how long does it take for that droplet on the root structure to go down. And the point is, some plants, you might want the water on 100% of the time. Sometimes it's a minute on, a minute off, a minute on, 5 minutes off, a minute on, 10 minutes off. And you just keep pushing it till you have less water, which means, and then what are the benefits of transpiration? So a plant absorbs nutrients and micronutrients and water to its root structure, and then it kind of like we transpire, we evaporate the water. Same thing that plants transpire, that then we try and capture it from a dehumidification and keep it in closed loop systems. But at some points, there are marginal returns from that transpiration, which is like the plant eating. And this is the data analytics. So we're as much a data science company as anything else, but how do we track this, understand plant growth to constantly reduce our footprint? But as leaders, what we need to do is state the goals and then enable our people to go make it happen.
In terms of Aerofarms, it's a B Corp registered company. It's a very mission-driven company. Young people today, they're looking to work for companies that are making an impact in the world. Where do you see Aerofarms' impact in not just vertical farming, but the broader, say, climate change and broader industries?
My opinion's changed here. At first, when someone at the company recommended that we join the B Corp world, my attitude was, no, let's not do it. Let's just keep our heads down and do the right thing. We don't need another certification. And we get approached to do all these certifications. And at a certain point, you just want to build a company and not fill out forms. That said, what resonated with B Corp is I realized the world, other businesses, they need inspiration and they need people to start raising the bar. So let's be another element of inspiration and start raising the bar. And B Corp resonated as an area to do that. One area I'll share a story that I'm proud of is when we went through the certification, I had someone saying, well, let's figure out like how we could optimize the certification and get a score. I said, no, let's just do it organically. Let's see what we have. We'll always try and be better. That's not going to lose who we are, but let's just see where we are. Let's not game it or whatever. And we ended up, I forget the numbers, but directionally this will be right. Let's say you need an 80, score of 80 to be a B Corp. We scored like 105 or something, like right off the bat, which felt good. I'm like, all right, we think we're sort of leading and doing things the right way. This is confirmatory to a certain extent. And then we said, let's see what other people are doing and how we could do better. And we keep doing things of that nature. But to your point, it's like, I'm happy we made the decision. I've started to say and use the word B Corp and pride more often, and I like talking about it and encourage others to do the same because it seems like a smart way that incorporates the environmental, incorporates the societal side, and we all need to start thinking in these terms.
I think it's an inspiration to see companies taking that responsibility and additionally like embracing it as well. How do you measure that impact?
Ultimately, philosophically, it's how do you do more with less? So that's one of the tenets of cradle to cradle and just design in general. So it could be do less from a capital cost with less plastic, less steel, looking at the balance of if we do less, do we still get more? So how do we grow more? Less energy, less water, less nutrients, micronutrients, less seed. So it's philosophically just saying, how do we do more with less? People don't realize, but every time they eat our product in the supermarket or food service, there's a little experiment going on. And it's they don't taste it, but it's there. How do we grow a little more magnesium, a little more zinc, a little more iron, a little different spectrum, a little different seed spacing, a little different temperature, humidity? There are all these different ways to change what a plant gets and look at the outcomes. Again, back to the data science. We're almost a data analytics company than anything else, enabled by our commercial and R&D efforts.
So David, just talking to you today, we gathered that you're a lifelong student, you're a serial entrepreneur, you're very mission-driven. Our final question for you is, what type of legacy do you hope to leave behind for future generations?
Push the bar high. I think it's a lot about dreaming and trying hard things. So there are areas where you could have incremental change and areas where we can have and need transformational change. Given the climate crisis and what's going on, now it's an area for transformational change and people that are going to solve really hard problems. And I hope the investment community gets behind those entrepreneurs. Our policy figures put a path that enables those entrepreneurs and creates a level playing field, because there are a lot of inefficiencies in our capital markets, in our policy area, but we need people to dream big, and we need to support them and celebrate them.
David, it's been a pleasure hosting you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
It's
so
been an
much.
honor.
Thank you. We would love you to let others know about this podcast.
So please rate us, leave us a comment, and share with someone who might enjoy it too.
And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next episode.